Hi guys, I'm Vishwaraj Gupta. I'm a data engineer. So guys, today I'm going to speak about DMS, Data Migration Services. So it's a service of AWS, Amazon Web Services. So I'm gonna take one simple example. For example, you are going to move from one city to another. For example, you are moving from New Delhi to Mumbai or Paris to London or New York to Nashville. So you need to move all your stuff and you need a big truck. So DMS is kind of big truck where you're gonna put all your stuff and gonna move from one city to another. So AWS provides you that truck, you put the data, you put your stuff inside that truck, and that truck takes your stuff in from one city to another city. So DMS, why I'm speaking that it's a truck, because there is another product of AWS that is S3. So you can move your, you can do migration from S3 to Redshift as well. But DMS, it's a kind of big project which will move all your bulk data at once. And there are a lot of advantages because in this replication instance, you will see that what are the benefits rather than going with S3 bucket. S3 bucket migration is also good, but the thing where DMS gives you a lot of services, you're gonna see. So I'm gonna show you a small demo on this. So let's create. So first thing, for example, you have SQL data. You are using Microsoft SQL Server. Your data is there. So that is your source data. And where are you going to move? You are going to move your SQL Server data in Redshift cluster. So guys, I'm sure if you have SQL Server, if you have database there, and then you are planning to move your data from there to Redshift, then this video is for you. So let's start. So first thing, once you'll go in DMS here in AWS, you'll click on Data Migration Service, and then from there you'll just create replication instance. So here you can mention anything, for example, SQL to Redshift. This is your replication instance name. You can ignore this one. If you really want to use, you can mention some more details there in description. And it depends what type of instance class you are going with. So I would suggest you should go if your data is like in terabytes. Definitely you should always go with DMS 18 large or R5 large. It depends. So I believe, for example, if my database is 10 terabytes, I would definitely go with not the largest one, but yes, at least I will go with large, maybe this one, just to have a quick movement. And engine version, so guys, engine version, it will be always different. So engine version is, it's kind of replication engine. So it's core AWS DMS software that runs on your replication. So for example, as I had mentioned, AWS gonna send a big truck. So just imagine there is an engine in there, so you didn't have to worry about the engine. It You'll always get a default engine version there. So when I did last time the migration, it was 2.4.0 something. So now it can always change. So it depends. So let's go to another point. So guys, as you can see, it is allocated storage GIB. So guys, in default, it is mentioned 50. So why it is mentioned 50? Because it is sufficient. So for example, allocated storage GIB. So guys, GIB is not gigabytes, it's gigabytes. So gigabytes is little bit more than gigabytes. So 50 gigabytes for your log files and cache transactions, I guess it's more than enough, So log files are basically typically like text files, and they are written somewhere in your hard drive. So where they are written, it depends on your program. So we are creating replication, so AWS will store their log files. It could be anywhere. They are very good in terms of finding the bugs in programs. So AWS needs to maintain, all these log files, and they are also using this for cache. So I'm going to explain you why they are using 50 gigabytes. so that you should know the basic about these inputs as well. So cache transactions are, so as you know, like there are three types of memory: hard drive, RAM, and third one is cache memory. So cache memory is basically the fastest one, but it is extremely low memory. So you have large files, for example, in the like if you have a lot of files in the cupboard behind your desk, that is your hard drive, and your desk where you can bring some files at your desk, that is your RAM. And then your drawers are kind of like cache memory, where you have the things to grab it quickly, for example your calculator, your pen, your stick pads and all. So replication instance need this drawers to grab some quick information. So, for example, if it will go on RAM or hard drive to fetch data or to run the program, it will take time. So there is always cache transaction where replication instance, grab it quickly and run the program, quickly. So let me go to another point. VPC. VPC is virtual private cloud. Again, it depends on your AWS engineer. There will be a default one as it is coming, but it's always to ask your AWS engineer which VPC you should choose. Multi-AZ. So guys, multi-AZ is basically, it's a very nice option if you are doing like ongoing replication loading. But in my case, I'm just going one full load, so I don't need multi-AZ. So for example, let me give you an example. It's if anything fails, so it basically creates a standby replica. So if there was any error or anything, if you choose multi-AZ, it will make sure that you'll still get those files. But in my case, my data is there secure in SQL Server, so I don't want to go with multi-AZ. There will be some billing for this, so I won't choose it, because if in case if in case there is any bug, I can go back to my SQL Server and run this DMS activity again. So it depends, but if you are doing ongoing replication, then I would say it is very much required, because that will make sure that your ongoing replication doesn't get into trouble. Public accessible. So publicly accessibly, it's probably yes in some cases and no in terms of security. So again, it depends, where you are moving your data. So since I'm moving internally in Redshift, you don't need it. And even your all the SQL Server details. So when I'll come to SQL Server part, I will tell you like what all things are required. So, but just make sure if you are turning it off, you cannot modify it again. So once you have selected, and if you think that in later, like you want to, you know, you don't want this public accessible, then you cannot do it any modification, So just make sure that you want it or you don't want it. Okay, so let me see advanced security and network configuration. So again, this is the part of your AWS engineer. You'll have to speak to him. You'll have to ask him all these details. KMS master key. So guys, maintenance. So maintenance is like it is related to our AWS engineers. If they want to do any maintenance, then they will know that they can do the maintenance at this time, so that your migration activity doesn't get hampered. So make sure you always mention it. For example, I keep it like on weekends if they want to make any changes, if they are making some, automations or, upgrades and all. So it's better you mention it yes, plus on weekend. Tags, you don't need it. And then you just click on create. I'm not creating it, and I'm just showing you once it is created, it will reflect here. After you create your replication instance, you have to create your endpoints. Endpoints is basically the source endpoint and the target endpoint. So let's create endpoint. So our first endpoint will be of source endpoint. So let's create this one. Can create any identifier. So for example, Vishu. Here again, source engine. So our source engine is Microsoft SQL Server, and access to endpoint database. So choose AWS Secrets Manager. This is basically related to your AWS services if you're moving internally, or it depends on your AWS engineer what he would suggest. But for SQL Server to Redshift, this is the best process. In this case, you'll have to mention the server name, your port. You should have login details. So, all these details, how you can get it, I will show you. So this is, for example, your SQL server. It looks like this, as you know, and your server name. Once you click on the login, once you connect, you'll see your server name here. You'll have login details, you'll have password. So you should have all these three details before you even start. So for port, you'll have for port and IP. So there is one port and one IP address. So for IP address, let me show you how you can get the IP address. So guys, IP address, we do not need it in creating the endpoint, but IP address will be required by your AWS engineer. So make sure you have IP address and port ready. So usually port for SQL Server, it's 1433, and IP address, you can use select connection property local net address as local net address, so you will get an IP address, but again you'll have to verify this thing with your DBA who is taking care of SQL Server. But just for your clarity, you should double check that this is your IP address when your DBA shares it with you, and you make sure that the local port is there. So all these details should be accurate. Then let me go back to DMS, so server name, as I've told you, it was there. Port, you have to mention 1433. 1433 depends. It is always 1433 for Microsoft SQL Server. Username and your password, you should have it, because if you have an account there in SQL Server, then you don't have to ask your DBA, because since you are using it, you know your database. Database name, what database are you moving? So for example, in SQL Server, you know that, okay, I'm going to move, like DB database in Redshift. Secure socket layer. So secure socket layer, it again depends. So secure socket layer in Amazon Redshift, since our target endpoint is Redshift. So, Redshift already has an SSL connection. So it does not require an SSL connection set up by DMS. So just ignore this one, keep it none. KMS master key, again, it is all related to like your AWS engineer. So KMS key management services, you can use default, or it depends, like what your AWS engineer suggests. And once it is created, it is done. You can create your endpoint. So this was the source endpoint. Now we will create target endpoint. So don't click on the same one. So once you'll create the endpoint here for the source one, you'll have to go back to endpoints and create another one. And in that one, you'll have to select target endpoint. And now target endpoint is our Redshift. You'll mention here the name for like Redshift, Vishu, for example. Choose an engine. You are choosing Redshift, and you can choose here provide access information manually. Again, you'll mention here the server name. So I'm sure that you have SQL Server and you have Redshift cluster, you have database there, you have already created your username and password, you have database there, so you should have all these information. So DMS is required once you have source and target endpoints ready. So source was our SQL Server database, and our target endpoint is our Redshift. So make sure that you already have a cluster there, you already have a schema there, you already have a database there, because all these information you will need it here. So you will know from there that there is port number, there is username, password, and database name. Once you'll create schema there in Redshift cluster, you'll create one database there. All other things are same. what I've told you in source endpoint, you'll create again, create endpoint, and you will get two endpoints there. So guys, once you'll have two endpoints, the next point is very important. Let me show you. So guys, once you'll have endpoints, as you can see, you'll click here, you'll have a lot of, there will be two endpoints, one source and one target. So you have two endpoints. Once your endpoints are there, just select first one source endpoint and then click on action and test connection. Test connection will make sure that it is working and it is ready. So once you'll click on test connection, the status will come testing. Just give some time, and once it is ready, it will be successful. So it has to be successful before you commence your DMS project. So make sure for both endpoints, for source endpoint and for target endpoint, make the status successful. So guys, we have created our replication instance, we have created our endpoints. Now everything is ready. So now we're going to make database migration task. This is the most important part. This will make sure that your data has moved from source endpoint to target endpoint. So guys, task identifier, so final moving, just creating this one. And replication instance, you'll have to select your replication instance, what you have created in replication instance. You'll mention your source endpoint, the one which we have created for SQL server, and target endpoint, what we had created for our Redshift endpoint cluster. Migration type. So guys, migration type, let me show you information. Migrate existing data and replicate ongoing changes, replicate data changes only. So guys, sometimes we just select migrate, existing data, because our whole data, for example, why are you using this DMS service? Because you want to move the whole chunk from SQL Server to Redshift. So you're going to do one time movement from there. So you choose this one. And migrate existing data and replicate ongoing changes. So like this one performs like one time migration from the source to the target, and then it even continues replicating the data changes. So this is good. Once your data is ongoing changes will also keep on coming in the target target endpoint, that is our Redshift. Replicate data changes only. So if you'll choose replicate data changes only, so it won't perform that one-time migration. So it will just copy the data changes which will happen from source to the target. So let's go to another point, that is task settings. So guys, you can always choose wizard or JSON editor. So I'm gonna go with wizard, and JSON editor is good who are very much into coding. So for example, I was using this JSON editor just to share it with my manager, that what all things have been selected, what all things are done in that one before creating this task. So I'm gonna click on wizard. So let me explain all these points. So guys, target table preparation mode. So for example, first one is do nothing. So, in do nothing, if the tables are already located in your target endpoint, for example, you have already created your tables, which were like you have already replicated the tables from SQL Server to Redshift, then you don't have to do anything, because that will just copy from there to those tables. But if you select drop tables on target, then it means you haven't created any table in Redshift. So what DMS will do, DMS will copy the tables, the complete format, and it will drop the tables as it is in your Redshift cluster. And truncate means that once you'll move your tables from SQL Server to Redshift, it will truncate the whole data. So you are just copying the tables there, not the data. Include LOB columns in replication. So LOB means large objects. So don't include LOB columns. So guys, it means that you don't want to include which are very large columns where there is a lot of data inside that column is large. And if you don't want to include, if you think that I don't need that column, so you can just select don't include LOB columns. But usually if that data is, it's always good to select the whole data as it is, and then you can make changes here. So I always select full LOB mode, that is, just I need the whole data as it is. And limited LOB mode, there is one feature where you can mention limited LOB mode. So for example, in one column there is that data which you need, but you don't need all those like rows which have a lot of like big long row. So for example, the size of that row is like more than 32 KB. So in default, they have mentioned 32 KB, which is good. It is more than enough. But if you really want to make any change, you can always make it 60. But it's always, I would suggest that to always go with full LOB mode. Let's go to another one and enable validation. So guys, this one is very important. So for example, why do we need this enable validation? Because for example, you are moving a lot of database from SQL Server, and it will make sure that your data movement is accurate. So for example, if you are, like you have in your SQL Server, there were like 5 million rows. So this will make sure that 5 million rows have been copied to the target. So how to view the results of validation? So when you'll go to AWS console, there is data migration tasks. This is console data migration task, and just see. So since I do not have as of now the migration task because I haven't created it yet. So once you'll create it, you will be able to see there is there, and in the task there is table statistics. So you can review the results there, and it will show you exactly that there were 5 million rows, and all those 5 million rows have been copied. So for example, if you want to revalidate the tables in a task, so again go to DMS console, choose data migration task once it is created, and then choose the name of your task. If there are a lot of tasks, you'll have to select that task, and from table statistics select the table, and then choose validation again. It will validate again, and you can review the migration task metrics section again, that okay, it is accurate or not. All right. So guys, enable CloudWatch logs. So CloudWatch logs, it basically collects monitoring and operational data. For example, logs, metrics, and events, to provide kind of unified view of AWS resources. For example, any error or debug, these kind of things. So it's always, I would suggest it's always good to go with CloudWatch logs. You can see the movement of your data. So these 2 points are very much important: enable validation and enable CloudWatch logs. So guys, let me speak about another part, that is table mapping. So guys, let me show you some more pictures. Since I do not have any endpoint or replication instance, it won't show here. So guys, after you have enabled the validation and CloudWatch logs, the next step is our table mapping. And table mapping is the last and very important part of data migration task. So I'm gonna show you the first picture. So guys, table mapping is basically what you are selecting from your source endpoint, and what you are going to dump in, what you are going to move in your target endpoint. So in table mappings, for example, you have schema, and you have table, and what action do you want. So there will be different selection rules. So if you want to add, for example, I want to move the whole, you know uh, all the tables from that schema in Redshift. So I'm going to select percentage, and then that's it. I'm not going to write anything else. So percentage means everything, all the tables. And what is the action? Action is include. So there are two action, include or exclude. So I want to move all these tables in Redshift. And there is another part that is filter. So let me show you the filter part, which is another part of table mapping. So table mapping here, as you can see, schema name, it's same. Your table name, this time I haven't selected percentage. So this time I'm selecting customers. So I just want to select customer table. I want to include that table, but there should be a filter in that column name that is agency ID. For example, I want customer table, but in the column which has agency ID, I just want the figures from 1 to 85. So I'm just selecting. So if you are aware of SQL queries, you will know you are just using simple SQL query in this one, and this will make sure that what you have selected has moved in that Redshift table. So make sure that your Redshift table has all the, excuse me, all the column names which are there in SQL table. Great. So next part, so once you have selected, it depends if you want to make any transformation as well. So this was table mapping was basically, as I had mentioned in, let me show you again, previous one. So previous one was this one. If you remember, table name is percentage. This means, so for example, you're just moving everything from SQL to Redshift, then just mention percentage. This will make sure that all the tables in that database has been copied to Redshift. But if you have any criteria, if you want to make filter specifically for one table, then it's better to mention the customer. And if you want to include or exclude, if you are just making any filter, you can add as many rules you want. For example, if you have 10 tables and you just want to move 5 tables, you can just specifically mention all these tables in in this selection rule. So this will make sure that only those tables and all those columns are moved from SQL Server to Redshift, nothing else. Now the another part after table mapping, it comes transformation rule. So transformation rule is very important. So guys, this is transformation rule. So after table mapping, there is another service which DMS is providing you, that you can transform your table as well. So for example, what is your target? Your target is column, or your schema is your target, or your table is your target. What transformation, where do you want the transformation? And schema is database, your table customer, and column name is agency status, for example. And what do you want in that column? You want to remove that column, so action is remove column. So there are a lot of actions which you can do in that column. For example, you can make it uppercase or lowercase. You can remove or add prefix, suffix. You can replace suffix or replace prefix. So there are a lot of actions in this one. It so these are the transformations. You can do it in DMS, which is a good thing. If you want to remove some column, sometimes you do not require that column and you want to keep a short like hot table there in Redshift for quick queries. So you can use this one. You can create different transformations accordingly to your column, or if you want to make some changes in schema or in the table, you can do it here. So guys, this is it. So once your replication instance is created, once your endpoints are created, you create your migration task. And migration task, it's very important. And once you'll create your task, it automatically asks you, like, if you want to automatically on create. So once you'll create the task, it will just start. If you want to create manually, then you can go in your migration task and click on it to to run. But it completely depends on you. And there is one more feature, that is enable pre-migration assessment run. It is always a good part that you can always assess your migration. So this is, for example, if you will find any issues or if there will be any impact on your database, it will tell you before running this task. So it is always good. Yes, so guys, this is it. Once you have created, so it will take some time. It depends how much is your data. And once your data migration task is finished, you can always go to your Amazon Redshift and you can check if you have already have a cluster. It'll so right now I do not have any cluster. So for example, once you'll have your cluster, you can always query in your database. So you'll have your editor here. So once for example, your database is now migrated to Redshift, you can select your database here. You can just select the schema here, and there will be some tables here. So guys, that's it. And here is the Redshift cluster where you can connect your database, and you can connect and run and do whatever you were doing in SQL Server, you can do it here. So guys, thank you very much for watching this video.